This episode of the podcast is brought to you by LeafWell.
Hello, Cannabinoid Connect listeners. Have you ever thought about getting a medical card? The process can be intimidating and hard to navigate. That's why I've partnered with LeafWell, the easiest and most affordable way to get a medical card in Texas and 32 other states in the U.S. LeafWell seamlessly connects you to a network of doctors that will help you get certified online in minutes. LeafWell is run by data scientists, cannabis specialists, and patient advocates that are passionate about increasing access and education around medical cannabis. LeafWell's patient support team is also there to support you throughout your entire journey using medical cannabis. As I've mentioned, I've partnered with LeafWell to provide all my listeners with a discount to become certified for medical cannabis. Simply go to their website at leafwell.com and use the promo code CCTX to receive $15 off the price of getting a medical card. LeafWell only charges you if you get approved, so what do you have to lose? Visit their website at leafwell.com today and use the promo code CCTX to get certified for medical cannabis. Risk-free. Peter, what is going on?
Hey man, how's it going? How are you today? Thanks for having me on.
I'm good, man. Thank you for coming on. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to talking to you today, specifically about, the banking sector within cannabis.
Cannabis banking. How is that a topic?
Which seems to be a topic of discussion quite frequently, right?
Yes.
Due to the restrictions and just everything or the lack of regulation. And we'll get into all that. But I'm curious, Peter. So, after looking at your background and seeing you spent 20 plus years in the financial space, right? And so you
Yes.
work for big firms. And then I look like more recently, and you're so active within the cannabis community. You're sitting on chairs of various committees like the NYCCIA, HVCIA. So where did this passion for cannabis come from? If you want to talk about, your relationship with the plant and kind of why your, mission is to really, revise what currently is happening within baking.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that question. All right, so I'll be very honest. This is not a passion project for me. Again, longtime banker, as you pointed out. What I realized in my career was that the people that I knew that did really well, they tended to specialize in something. They were known in a field. Um, I saw people my age that were just killing it in a particular field because they went all in on it.
Right.
So quite frankly, I thought I saw an opportunity to do just that. And actually, this might make you laugh, but what happened was at the time, the bank that I worked for brought on a team of crypto banking experts. Now, mind you, this was a good 7 years ago, let's say. And these guys were, crypto banking experts. And I remember thinking to myself, bullshit.
Well, if it's anything besides Bitcoin and Ethereum, right? I mean, what were they into the other kind of secondary coins or?
Well, again, keep in mind this is 7 years ago, right? So,
That's true.
back then it was really mostly just Bitcoin. It was Ethereum, and then there was all these concepts of blockchain and stable coins, as you're pointing out, was starting to get hot. Now, again, keep in mind this is just banking, right? So, getting accounts, doing the compliance work. But the point is, I remember thinking to myself, all right, these guys kind of spoke that into existence, right? And so I thought that was the moment that I jumped out of the nest. I said, you know what? They just did it. I can too. And good timing, I think. There was a
Sure.
bank at the time that wanted to replicate the model that my bank sort of championed. And it was a particular niche that, of course, I knew well because I'd been there 12 and a half years or something like that. And I knew that the bank also wanted to do cannabis banking. And I basically said, I spoke it into existence, right? I said, I could do both for you. And it made sense, right? It was kind of a risk-free bet, if you will, because I could absolutely do the one thing. And hey, they had none of the other anyway. So if I failed,
Right. Right.
So the point is, I wanted something that where I could become highly specialized in a particular niche. And it was greenfield, no one was really doing it, at least not well. No, people were, let's be honest, 5 years ago, there were very few banks,
Hmm.
even thinking about cannabis banking. If they were doing it, I'm not sure if you knew this, back then, it was the norm to send out NDAs, non-disclosures.
Hmm.
So you bank somewhere, you're a cannabis business, you bank at a certain bank, they ask you to sign an NDA so no one knows you bank there.
Really?
um, it
Wow.
still is fairly common practice in certain banks. But yeah, like that's like now you're starting to see banks actually have advertisement, right? They take out booths. But when
Right.
I first started out, it was completely like, no, they're almost like holding their noses.
Yeah,
Um, so if there is a passion in it for me, it is just that I felt like, no, this can normalize, and I want to lead that charge.
for sure.
Hence, I was on the NCIA banking, the National Cannabis Industry Association's Banking and Financial Services Committee. I started a banking committee for ASTM International. And that, like you said, I sit on a number of committees and stuff like that. And all of that to drive towards the same place, right? Which is, look, this is in other industries, you would see this. You would see experienced, long-time bankers sitting in positions that has to do with banking and finance.
Right.
Um, and why not cannabis, right?
Right, right. No,
Yeah.
that I mean, that makes total sense, right? It's just kind of a natural pivot, and like you said, it's kind of there's risk reward there, really, and the risk is very minimal because no one's doing it. So if you fail fast, but you move on.
Yeah.
I'm curious to get your perspective because, after deciding to make that pivot and then lifting the hood, as you will, and kind of just looking to see what regulations are out there or lack thereof, right? And constraints that these MSOs or SSOs are dealt with. What was your reaction? Was it like a holy shit kind of moment, or did you already kind of know going in that it was a little messy?
Definitely several holy shit kind of moments. In fact, I'm going to admit, in the early days, looking back, I did say a lot of things that were wrong. I just made certain assumptions based on banking, traditional banking. Um, I think it's like any niche, right? Like when you start diving in and you have to learn the nuances, the language, the verbiage. In cannabis, of course, there is a very specific thing, which is every market is different, every state is different. So like what you learn in the state of New York is not at all applicable, let's say, to like New Jersey or Connecticut.
Right.
And that was a hard lesson I learned early on when I literally said it and said it with like conviction, like, no, that's not true. Like,
But I mean, there's probably lessons to be learned also, right? Because there's
yeah.
got to be some things that are kind of adaptable or can be emulated, right, within other states that maybe New York is doing or Connecticut's doing. Have you seen a lot of crossover in that way?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's funny. I wonder why we don't learn that lesson more. Because by now, you've seen several markets, several states go through the same exact pattern, right? Like there's a trajectory. There's this initial sort of launch, and then frankly, at some point, there's a crash. And I don't know why we keep, repeating history. Um, Now, granted, that's easier said than done. I just mean if you know it's going to happen, why not plan for that to happen?
Right.
Let's say in the growers section, for example, in the grower sector, excuse me. Again, you've seen it over and over again. At some point, wholesale flowers crash. It just does, and seemingly overnight. So why then are you basing your entire business model on the $2,000 a pound versus the inevitable crash that's coming, right? So
Right.
um, now, again, to be fair, it's just the way these markets shake out. The lead time to creating a grow facility is months, maybe years out. So when you're at a point when the state is still ramping up and literally you can't keep your inventory on the shelf, the natural reaction is to say, well, more capacity, I'm going to build for that. But by the time you build, everyone else has as well, and there's new licenses coming on. And again, that's what contributes to the inevitable crash.
Mm-hmm.
what do you do about it? I mean, I think that's more on the regulators, I would imagine. But again, to your point, look, we've seen it over and over again. Like, why not? Let's do something about it, you know?
Mm-hmm. I'm also curious to get your thoughts. I mean, it's not a a bull market right now. We are going through somewhat of an economic decline, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's funny that I hear the financial news network still talk every day. Are we in a recession? Are we headed toward a recession? It's like, guys, I think we've been in a recession for the past, I don't know, what, 3 quarters now, 4 quarters, but
yeah.
because of its definition, of course. But my question to you is like, how have these capital raises affected the cannabis industry, and what have you seen in terms of um, investments or even M&A activity?
A huge. Now to your point, how much of it is secular? How much of it is specific to cannabis, right? Because again, to your point, the market overall has downturned, so less dry powder, less capital available out there. Money has gotten more expensive, meaning because rates have precipitously risen. The idea that you can just have like dry powder, readily investable dollars sitting around like that's not going to be the case anymore.
No.
Um, to some extent, I worry that, between quantitative easing, sort of easy money policy that we just let linger on for so long. Yeah, when I say we, like you and I, you and I had no. It's not
not
as if
not
they asked.
not me and Peter like just twiddling our thumbs, letting it happen, right?
Yeah, it's not as if they asked my opinion on this subject, but the reality is that yeah, look, as a monetary policy, we have decided as a society to not absorb pain.
That's right.
We kicked the can down the road a lot over several major incidences, right? Like to some extent, the last recession, even then we did some of that, quantitative easing.
Yep.
So the truth is, yeah, like I think we're starting to see all these things coalesce into one sort of, unfortunately, a major storm. And yes, that obviously impacts the cannabis industry from a capital raising perspective. Now, that's the bigger picture. On the micro level, I think what you're seeing though is that some of the early LPs, some of the early limited partners that invested, frankly, they didn't see a return on their dollar. Um, and as with any sector, it tends to be specialized. There are certain investors that say, I like this industry. So those same investors are now saying, well, we're going to sit back because as I look across my trading desk, my board, everything is red. So am
Right.
I necessarily going to keep chasing dollars after this? And then, of course, there's this unfortunate pattern. Again, keep repeating the same pattern, right? Where we're chasing federal legalization, we're chasing regulation change. So every time SAFE passes Congress, we see boom, um, stocks jump up, and then of
Right.
course at some point it fails to pass the Senate, and then stocks drop, right?
Right.
So again, this theme of like we're not learning a lesson. Um, uh, Point is a lot
Well,
of investment
let
thesis
me
was
let me
based.
pause you right there because I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, right? So,
Yeah,
um, you're absolutely right. Like the market right now is dictated by federal, right, like reform and
yeah.
particularly safe banking. Like everyone is hoping that safe banking passes and it's the end all be all. And I'm wondering, like, what do you think really is going to be the catalyst? Because of course you have federal reform, you have those specific legislative bills that help within the banking sector, but I'm talking more like state level, right? Like, these states can go online, depending on
Yeah.
the votes. So, will that help push it all? I mean, really, what's the end catalyst to get us where we want to be?
Um, so a couple of things to consider there, right? And look, anytime you prognosticate on politics, right? um,
Oh my God, good luck,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
So a couple of things to consider. First, um, 2018 Farm Bill legalized hemp and CBD, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I were to ask you, do you think banks have embraced hemp CBD today? What would you think?
No, because I've been in it. I've
Right?
experienced it. I was an idiot because our business was a consulting agency for the hemp industry because we
Yeah,
kind of farmed out a lot of that specialty work,
yeah,
and we had our own expertise area. But um I had the name Cannabinoid Nation, right? And so right when I went to the bank, they're like, "Hey, buddy, step one, don't have any type of cannabis term in your company name." And I was like,
Yeah,
"Oh, so you learn these things." So to answer your question, no, not
no.
friendly. Yeah.
So 2018, so 5 years, 5 years. And today, right, you don't necessarily see like, okay, hemp is good to go. And that's fully federally legal, right?
Mm-hmm.
CBD, you see it everywhere now. It's like ubiquitous. The other thing is consider this: the FDA literally just punted, right? 5 years after legalization, they said, "Well, we're not sure what to do with CBD." Back to you, Congress. So the question would be, if there was safe banking passed today, if there was federal legalization, full blown rescheduling, descheduling, how long would it take before there is actual frontline impact? Right?
Oh, 10 years.
Yeah, years, right? So to some extent, there's that. Let's consider the fact that that's way optimistic if that is how you are investing. Um, if your entire investment thesis is based on, okay, it's going to be federal one day, that's probably true. But what is one day? When is that? Like, how long is your timeline?
Right.
And then two, what did you have in mind as like success? What does success mean to you? Um, I recently said this, and it was met with derision. Unfortunately, I said if you look around at the pubcos, the publicly traded cannabis companies, right? Is anyone really killing the cannabis game?
No.
Not really, right? Like what are they good at? And I don't necessarily mean this as a criticism, but the at least the publicly ones, the big MSOs, what are they doing? They really operate more like roll-ups. They are constantly moving in the direction of mergers and acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
They operate more like a roll-up fund. So from my banking world, that is a typical strategy of a roll-up. All you're doing is continuously buying up more companies and getting bigger and bigger. So what is their thesis hung on? Well, clearly it's a land grab. They believe there's value in the licenses. So they're playing for the fact that one day there's going to be federal legalization, but the licenses will be grandfathered in and thus have value. Is it true? I don't know. I don't think anyone does, right? Because if we project, I'm not sure, 30 years into the future, and everyone says, cannabis is going to be a CPG kind of business, it's going to be Johnson and Johnson, et cetera. Let's assume that that's true. Well, then the licenses are valueless.
Right.
It'll probably be
Because,
more, yeah.
well, go ahead. Go ahead. I want to hear your explanation as to why.
Well, because if it's going to be sold the way we sell consumer packaged goods, then yeah, it's going to be on shelves and it starts
Right.
in supermarkets and CVS and stuff like that. Um, Branding will become much more important, of course. Now, from a protectionist perspective, each state will start to worry about, well, what do we do with the licenses that we have now? Um, so in the Northeast, again, I'm in New York, we have all these like 30 million, $40 million indoor grow houses. Are those truly sustainable in the long-term future when you can buy sun-grown California weed or let's take that even further. You can import Colombian grown weed, you know. Um, I'm not sure. I mean, I think those cultivation centers. I mean, look,
I see what you're saying.
if
You're saying like in the future and where interstate commerce is open and it's just like open borders kind of thing. Is that what you're
yeah,
yeah. Yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
No, that's a really good point. I agree with you there. That makes total sense, right? Because they're
yeah,
just going to get the best grown, like, and it's economically feasible for them in
yeah.
California because they have the environment, right? I mean, they're not.
Correct. Yeah,
I understand. So
yeah,
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to take it like a little side turn here and just ask you this
yeah.
question because I was going to bring it up later on in the discussion. But there's a lot of talk in California about them pushing interstate commerce. I don't know a lot of detail about how and why, how the loophole and how that's all going to play out at the federal level. But what do you know about it? And fill us in, basically.
Well, keep in mind, I'm no attorney, right? I guess from a banking perspective, here's what I would say. Currently the way cannabis banking works is that in 2014, FinCEN, the Financial Crime Enforcement Network, released a set of guidance. FinCEN is a function of the Treasury, a primary guidance set, a regulatory body in the banking world. They said, you know, if you're going to bank cannabis, make sure you do this. So in other words, we, as your regulator, here are our expectations. So what does that guidance say? Well, essentially it follows the Cole memo. Um, Within the Cole memo, then there is a specific clause that says ensure that there is no interstate commerce.
Hmm.
Because what the Cole memo essentially said was, as long as it's state legal, we the feds, we're going to take a step back. We get it. There is a discrepancy between federal law and
They're
state
they're
law.
they're acknowledging that. Yeah, that
Yeah,
separation. Yeah.
they're simply acknowledging, hey, look, federal law right now says no. State law, some states are now legalizing. What we're doing is we're taking a step back. Sure, as feds, we have supremacy. We can in fact go in there, Bigfoot that program.
Mm-hmm.
But the Cole memorandum essentially said we won't do that, provided that it's state legal. The banks follow suit as long as it's state legal and you're following this set of guidance. We are also saying the same thing. We're not going to say it's okay. We're not going to say it's not okay. Here's our expectations of what we would look for when we audit your program. So, from a banking perspective, we have a problem. If you allow that interstate commerce, you are in violation of how cannabis banking currently works.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you're speaking to the fact that if they were to move forward with that, it still wouldn't be legal under the Coleman clause that you were just.
Well, keep in mind, Cole memorandum was in fact rescinded, but it has stayed in principle. It stayed the guiding principle of how everything
I
works.
see. I see. Yeah, it's
So
kind of the North Star. It's what everyone uses.
correct,
Yeah.
correct, yeah. So even though the original Cole memo was rescinded, the trickle down effect that it has on every agency, banking included. So if the question is how is cannabis banking being done today? Because look, it is federally illegal. How is it being done? Well, it's being done through the 2014 FinCEN guidance, which is based on the Cole memorandum.
In the
If a
state.
state, if a state or any California or otherwise, if any state decided to circumvent that, create this, and again, I'm no attorney. Can they do that? I don't know. But if they did it, it would violate the spirit of the 2014 FinCEN guidance. And then the bank would say, I don't think I can, and again, I'm projecting ahead, but I imagine that a bank would say, I don't think I can do this. Because when my regulators come, that's the first question they're going to ask me. And I wouldn't be able to support you doing that.
Yeah. I got so many mixed feelings with all that.
Yeah.
Because one thing I kind of see it as like a gross California thing to do, not for the particular thing they're pushing itself, but I heard another legislation that they're trying to pass where they're trying to tax their residents who have left the state, trying to
Oh.
move. They want to tax them, which I'm saying is insane. And then you look at the cannabis industry as a whole and how high the taxation is there, right? It's
Already,
I've
yeah.
had several conversations about that on this podcast.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I
Wait,
get
before
that.
we move on, I do want to say this, and I think it's kind of interesting. Again, New York.
I
We
wasn't
have
going to move forward. I was just going to say one other thing is that sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
finish this thought. So for California, I get that the quality of the flower is great and it's the best environment for that. But it's kind of presumptuous to assume that everyone in the country just wants the flower and not give their own, state a shake at it this early in the
right.
game,
Correct. Yeah.
So that's where I think it's at. I think I ultimately understand that interstate commerce is inevitable, but why are we rushing the process here? We got 19 states that are adult use.
Yeah.
We're not even halfway there yet, so go ahead. Sorry, I went off of that tangent.
No. Well, so let's loop back to that because I do think that is a preview of what might happen if federal legalization happens, say tomorrow. Because what California is trying to do, again, in a macro sense, I think it's exactly what's going to play out at some point in the future. So in other words, there's a reckoning coming, right? Why is California trying to do that? Because they have so much weed, they need to sell
They got to sell it. Exactly.
they got to
The
sell it.
black market is undercutting them.
Yeah. They have so much capacity. They realize we have too much stuff, and they have good stuff. Look, they have the good stuff. People
For
want that.
sure.
They want the California. They want the Oregon. They want the
I love it.
Washington.
Yeah.
But will the states be okay with that? Right. So that's the protectionism. If you are a senator from the state of New York, and you have, I don't know, billions of dollars worth of indoor grow houses
New York will
controlled
never
by
do it. They'll opt out. They're going
yeah,
to opt out. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. In other words, California has this, like, it's a little bit of a wet dream, right? Hey, we are net producers, right? But
But
everyone wants to be net producers. Who wants it?
well, and here's the thing. I think California, of course, knows that New York won't, but they're just gonna get as many states as they can, right? I mean,
Well, I'll tell you,
it,
and I'm sorry, this is the point I was going to make before. So
yeah,
in New York City, perhaps you've heard, we have a proliferation of let's. I'm going to use the term illegal. I know this is a little controversial in the world, but these are unlicensed dispensaries popping up everywhere. Um,
really.
NYPD. So NYPD is only in the city of New York. Okay, so in the city of New York, NYPD estimates that there is 1,300 illegal shops.
Whoa. And just open like storefronts, like not hiding.
Storefronts. No, open storefronts with sign, sandwich boards out front, specials, menus online.
No shit. That's wild. Wow.
1,300 just in the city, not the state of New York, the city of New York.
I
Um, when you walk into a lot of these shops, what do you think you are buying?
don't
These
think
are
you'd know, right?
these are branded California metric tagged
No way.
legit products.
Crazy. You just blew my mind. So
What's
California's
happening? Yeah, yeah.
utilizing, wow, New York. Because New York's still not online. When does New York become online for sales?
Well, technically we're online. We're the rollout's been slow. We have now three stores open that are, licensed. One of which is a non for two of which are not for profits actually. Um, so we have a problem, right? Like it's really easy to open up an illegal shop. So think about this. Think about this path. If you and I were thinking about opening, getting licensed, opening up a store, well, 6 years into the MRTA being signed, we have three legal stores open. Conversely, there's 1,300 shops just in the city of New York alone, right? And
Crazy.
again, when you walk into these shops, what do you see? So there's this argument that, like, well, you're buying, unlicensed, untested, illegal stuff. I'll be honest with you, a lot of these shops are selling legal. Well, they were legal in a different state. They're not actually legal here.
But
So somebody broke the law, but not. It's
if it's
actually fascinating. It's
if
the
it's
these per
go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it's actually fascinating that if you trace back, like, how these things happen. So they believe that. So there's this term, I don't know if you've heard it, burner distro. So you and I can, like, go to another state, buy a distribution license, right,
Mhm.
legally. So everything is legit. We buy up legal products. So at this point in the transaction, everything is legal technically. You've got a licensed grow selling to a licensed distro. We then shut down that license, truck it across the country. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what what is NYPD like doing about it? Or what's like has anybody like even like the federal government talked about stepping in? Because that's a lot, right? I mean, that's basically sustaining a whole industry now that's not fully at launch, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's almost worse than that actually, because one of the things that New York State did was, so in our regulation in the MRTA, we wanted to, right the wrongs of history. So people that were disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. So you have a record, you have a marijuana conviction in the state of New York. These are the first retail licenses that we're rolling out. So in theory, we're saying, hey, what? We're recognizing that, like, those laws were fucked up, and
right.
now we want you to benefit from this newly legal industry. But instead, what's happening, right? These people are sent into the slaughter.
Wow.
So what are they doing about it? Well, it's actually tricky because they don't want the optics. I mean, look, it's legal now, right?
Right.
They don't want the optics of people now being let out in cuffs, you know, but
It's
they
kind of like
also
it's
don't
too
want,
late almost, right? Like
yeah, yeah,
how do you put the genie back in the bottle at this point when they are looking like established,
yeah, yeah.
completely compliant, companies. I mean,
Actually, it's
that's
funny.
it's wild.
I guess about middle of last year or so, there was one of the local newspaper. I think it was New York Cannabis Insider, I believe it was. They polled, they asked all the local prosecutors. So you were talking county prosecutors, why aren't you doing something about these illegal smoke shops? And roughly half of the respondents said, we're not actually sure what crime to charge them with.
Are they getting the tax money? They got to be getting the sales
Well, no, of
tax on
course
it,
not.
right?
No, no, of course not, right?
No, they're
Because,
not.
well,
Yeah.
because it's illegal. They're probably not. I mean, look, I didn't audit these books, but they're probably
Right,
not.
right.
They're probably not saying, yeah, I sold $100,000 of illegal weed.
Of course, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Like they wouldn't be as honest on their books because they
yeah,
know, in fact, what they're doing is not legal.
yeah.
Wow.
Well, one thing that the city has just started doing, is so again, they don't necessarily want to like raid shops with like SWAT teams or whatever. So they're starting to find like little ways to sort of petty you to death. So for example, we have all these trucks. So they look like ice cream trucks, right? Like driving around the city of New York, like in Times Square, Um, and they're illegal. And recently it made the news that like a whole bunch of them overnight got all swept up. They were towed. They were impounded. But what did they get them for? Unpaid tickets.
Oh, so they got to find different ways to get at
Yeah,
them. And they're probably going to
correct.
be relentless to try to really
Yes.
drain them, right? I mean,
Yeah,
of their
yeah.
funds, their
It's
capital.
like the Al Capone thing, right? They'll get you on something. It's taxes. It's
Right.
unpaid tickets. So recently,
And you don't want to fuck with the
our
government when they're doing that because you're always going to lose that battle.
they'll always find a way. Now it's whack-a-mole, right? Like you'll just roll up and do something else. But they've started going after landlords. They see there's an illegal shop. They'll write a letter to the landlord, say, "Hey, there's an illegal shop in your building."
Yeah.
So things like that. I can see them doing that successfully with sort of the entire infrastructure, right? Like, hey, next might be the banks. Hey, did you know that so and so is an illegal shop and they bank with you? So
Yeah. This is like related to New York, but kind of off topic. It's my I'm curious to how you think this is going to play out because like obviously with the lack of safe banking, we're seeing that criminals are targeting dispensaries and because it's a cash business, right? So they kind of know, hey, if I hit it at this time, whatever, it's just a horrible situation.
yeah.
So my question to you is like when and because it sounds like New York is already moving with there's at 1,300 and what'd you say 80 dispensaries. Um, my like are they is there any type of delivery going on right now? And if so, like how are these if these individuals are on a bike delivering, like are they strapped? Do they have any type of protective defensive gear? Because it's come up before and I was so curious. I forget who I talked to on the podcast about this, but how are they managing that?
That's a good question. Basically, we don't know, and I say, and I'm not trying to say that flippantly. What I mean is, we're literally, it's real time, right? Like it's happening as we
Oh
speak.
yeah.
They just started to. I think the state is acknowledging that hey, we're having trouble opening the stores, the retail locations. Now they're allowing for you to get delivery online first, so delivering is starting to happen.
Mm-hmm.
One interesting thing that they did that is both, laudable but curious. In the regs, it literally mandates that delivery has to be cash, has to be prepaid. I guess,
Prepaid.
to your point, it sounds like they're
Makes
trying to
sense.
address the safety issue. The thing is,
They're still
um,
carrying weed.
well, they're still carrying weed, number one. Number two, what, how, what would you say is the cashless payment situation in cannabis?
Right now?
Yeah.
the cashless payment system. There's like certain POSs that
Yeah,
serve the cannabis industry, right?
but
Like,
not good, right? Like how?
no, they're not like the
Yeah.
main people, the players. No.
So how exactly is the state mandating that? Like how is that? How does that
Good
work
point.
exactly? So you're saying, oh no, you has to be cashless. Okay, you are aware that cashless payment is a problem in the
Right,
industry,
right.
right? For 10 plus years, it has been a problem, but you have decided you solved the problem by mandating it. Thank you.
Thank you for making our lives more difficult. I
Thank you.
appreciate
So it
it.
has to be cashless. Got it. No problem.
Yeah. They'll just have to pay in
um,
Bitcoin or something. I don't know.
it is a problem, especially in I guess tight metropolises, right? Like a New York City, where yeah, it's predominantly bikes. In a
Yeah.
car, you might feel some form of safety, some measure of safety. Yeah, on a bike, that's it. It's you against the elements. But luckily, the state mandated cashless, so we're good there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Peter, talk to me about Green Check Verified. You're serving as the senior vice president. Tell us about, what y'all do within the banking and compliance and regulation sectors of cannabis and what you're focused on for this year.
Sure. Thank you, and thank you for the opportunities for the plug.
Yeah, man, of course.
Well, just backing up a little bit, I was a longtime banker, 23 years in banking or so. And my last couple of stops, I actually ran cannabis banking programs, um, which actually brings to me to the role that I currently have. Funny enough, when the company first started, the founders, of which I'm not one, the founders of GreenCheck were more software people. So deep experience creating software, we're talking ERPs. And they thought they would create the software that banks and credit unions would use for their cannabis banking platforms. It turns out banks and credit unions were not exactly knocking down their door trying to buy the software. Who knew? And so they had to build an entire sort of consulting practice around the software.
Right.
Um, and that's more where I come in, right? Like, so a bank or credit union is like, oh, we're thinking about cannabis, and we can walk them through that entire journey. Um, it's actually been super successful. Prior to there being companies like a Green Check, and then not necessarily just Green Check. I mean, there are other companies like it, but um, it was all done manually. Um, and if you think about the regulatory burden of banking cannabis, we have to make sure that literally every dollar of deposit can be traced to a dollar worth of legal goods.
Hmm.
And it's really the onus of doing that prevents, or keeps some of the institutions from jumping in, meaning they study it and they're like, no, we're not doing stuff like that. We're not doing that, right? Um,
Right.
so essentially that's where the magic is, right? Like our ability to sort of take the bite out of cannabis banking. Um, so I'll throw a statistic at you. When it was a manual program, so back in my day, um, we used to have this ratio. We would say 5 to 8. So for every 5 to 8 cannabis businesses you banked, you would have to add another body. Like that's how much work is involved in banking
Wow.
cannabis.
Just because the
Conversely, Green Check.
complexities of just like all the hurdles you have to jump, the red tape. I mean,
Yeah,
talk to us a little bit of some of that. I mean, for those maybe listening who are interested in getting into cannabis, like what are some of those complexities that you on the front lines are dealing with?
sure. So think of it this way. There's essentially, and obviously I'm way oversimplifying, but there's essentially three pieces of data. Right? So money in the bank, sales receipts, and state reported data. Again, way oversimplifying, right? So you as the bank, you need to show, again, literally every dollar can be traced. So you have money in the bank. So let's walk through an example. $100,000 of deposit comes in today. Cash, mind you. $100,000 of
Of
cash.
course.
Let's say you had a way of figuring out that $80,000 of that was legal, meaning that dispensary has reported an $80,000 worth of sale to Metric, to BioTrack, etc.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, how do you do that? How do you make sure that there was that Metric impression? So again, we do that. The other thing is now you have $20,000 left over. Now that could be okay. It could be things like vape cartridges, batteries, hats, etc. But how do you capture that data? How do you know that, yeah, it's $10,000 worth of batteries, right? How do you know that it's $10,000 worth of hats?
Right.
And then you need to be able to collate that data, right? Sort it all and keep it in a readily audible format because a year from now, when the examiner comes and says, hey, show me, on February 19, 2023, how did you know that this was $10,000 worth of batteries? Now take that, multiply that by every company, every cannabis business you bank, and again, over 300 business days, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow.
That's essentially the pain involved in banking cannabis.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's where, like, I mean, at that point, you're like, thank God I have this solution to like have everything aggregated in one point. Because it'd be a fucking nightmare if you didn't, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, so again, back in my day, we when I say manual, it was like Excel spreadsheets with like pivot tables and stuff like that, right? So there were a few main philosophies. One was perhaps like look back audits. So in other words, every quarter, let's say a bank might go into a typical dispensary and say, okay, now show me your books for the last 3 months or whatever. And essentially they're just scrubbing it to make sure that those numbers make sense. Then there were the manual uploads for like sales receipts. So this is like pulling POS data, stuff like that. Um, all of which is to say that like it was being done, but by simply throwing people at it, by throwing bodies at it. So like if you think about it, whether it's a question of scalability, uh, um, resource management, or frankly accuracy, right? Because just because you're willing to throw a person at that problem doesn't mean you're doing it well, right? Like
right.
imagine me looking at spreadsheets and stuff like that. Like I wasn't always doing it well, right? So again, 5 to 8 when it was a manual process. Today we have clients that are managing 50, 60, 80 accounts per FTE, full-time employee. I'm sorry, FTE hours are how compliance resources are measured by the regulators. How
I see.
much hours are you dedicating towards the problem? It's worth noting that this idea that like cannabis banking isn't available, it's kind of a myth today.
I've
Um,
heard that.
now,
Yeah.
yeah. Now, look, it was very true in the early days, right? Like if we go all the way back to Colorado, California, like literally banks and credit unions would say, no, no, we can't do that. And again, it wasn't until there was Cole memo, then FinCEN 2014 guidance, that's when it really started to pick up. I can actually throw some numbers at you. In 2016, FinCEN's data suggests that there was 300-ish financial institutions, right?
Wow.
Today, their data shows there's 750-ish financial institutions. Now, to be clear, most insiders agree that their numbers are way too high, way too high. Even the 2016 number was too high. And we can get into why first, but for now, we think today's number is more like 200, 250-ish, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, there's hundreds of institutions, you know. Now,
Right.
dividing that number against the entire all the legal states obviously does mean there's only a handful in each given state.
They're spread thin, right? At that
Yeah,
point.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, that is interesting. I mean, so it sounds like going back to our earlier discussion about safe banking and how seems like the cannabis market right now is really just betting on that
Yeah.
passing or any type of federal reform. It seems it kind of goes both ways though, right? Because it sounds like it really is needed, right, for the 19 operating states and plus the medicinal states at 36, right?
Yeah,
But also like it is a catalyst, so it is it is a
yeah,
way where it kind of
yeah, yeah.
trajects us and gets us forward. So safe banking is important. I mean, where do you think that legislation kind of falls? I mean, is it dead? Is it going to be standalone and pass standalone? I mean, what, or is it baked into other bills? Where does it go from here?
Well, so a couple of things. One, and look, I want to be clear. I am pro safe banking, and I'm bullish
Right.
on it passing. That said, I do think in a practical sense, it probably, well, as currently constituted, so meaning we don't know what the ending verbiage is going to look like, right? But if it passed today, let's say the way it's currently written, Honestly, I don't think it would have a huge impact. It would be a great catalyst, right? So to your point, I think it would be a great incremental step. Definitely needed. What it will do is it will bring more banks into the fold, and that's a great thing
Do you think it'll bring more
because
businesses also?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, the reality is that today a cannabis business that wants an account, like literally a checking account, let's say, it can get it. You know, a cannabis business that wants an account today will be able to get banked. It may be underbanked in terms of capability, capacity, and cost, but it can get an account. So the point is, if safe banking, if all it does is allow you to get a checking account, well, that exists today, right?
Right,
It's
right.
just it might be an account that you're kind of like, well, that costs me a lot of money and it doesn't do what I want it to do.
Hmm.
So incrementally, that's what I think safe banking does because it'll bring more banks into the fold, more credit unions into the fold, which means there'll be competition and it will drive down costs, right? Um, Now, if safe banking incorporates things like credit cards, well, that would be a sea change. That would be a major change. If it had things like capital markets, so listing to New York Stock Exchange, Nasdaq, etc. Well, that would be huge, and that would be something that you're talking about, which is will that be a big boost? That would be huge. Um, but if it's just checking accounts, it would just be again great, but yeah, definitely an incremental step.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, once they're listed on the exchanges, it's game over because I mean that's when institutional capital comes in.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's the boom at that point. And before I used to think like if safe banking passed that all that would happen all at once, but no, that's not quite the case. In fact, one could argue that one could happen before safe banking, right? Like listing or maybe not. Probably not, I guess.
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, if you think about the credit card example, right?
Yeah.
The just like banking, right? The truth is banks are opening those cannabis accounts today, right? It's happening. There's lending, there's banking. It is happening. It, Again, it might be small, it might be very limited in scope, and only a handful of institutions doing it. Um, if we think about the number that I threw out, right? Like we think there's 200-ish financial institutions banking cannabis. Well, there's over 10,000 financial institutions in America, licensed institutions. So less than 1%. So
Hmm.
what would happen though if institutional capital came into the space? What would happen if credit cards, so the associations, MasterCard, Visa, technically there's nothing preventing them from doing it either. That's self-imposed. They decided they don't want to do it.
Hmm.
There's not a law somewhere. Well, it is federally illegal, right? But um, there's nothing preventing from them doing it except their own decision. So yeah, if something like that was to happen, that would be the sea change that the industry needs.
It's what we're looking for because right now it's a bloodbath out there, but it's a bloodbath everywhere. I mean, we know the
Yeah,
current economics, climate that we're in. To your point earlier, this needs to happen. I agree with you in terms of the
yeah,
quantitative easing, the
yeah.
tapering, the interest rate hikes, because we've kicked the can down for so long. And my big question is, do we continue to kick the can? Is there some type of like, do we switch to the, digital dollar and everything goes away? Like what happens? Like, what is your prediction as we're wrapping up here? Like, bring out your crystal ball, Peter.
Well, crystal balls, are worth nothing, but I can shake it, and I can say that, yeah. I mean, look, you can only kick the can down the road for so long, and um, think of it this way. Now, when we were kicking the can, the interest rate was like nothing. So the cost, debt service, the cost that it required for us, for the US to carry its debt has now more than like six, seven, eight times as high.
It's
So
impossible to
meaning,
pay back.
yeah,
You can never pay it back.
yeah. I don't know if you saw that statistic where they said we will increase something like we will now add another $18 trillion in debt over the next few years.
Insane. It
unless
is
we do something
insane.
about it, so to speak, right? So,
It's crazy.
um,
Yeah.
I saw, I was in the
But pay
army.
your taxes, and if you
Yeah.
don't, you're gonna go to jail, Peter. You know?
um, I was in the army, and I remember this general came by and gave us a speech one. I can't remember his name. I would love to attribute him, but not to get super political, but he was asked, "What is your big concern for America?" Now, keep in mind, he's talking about soldiering, right? He's talking about war,
Right.
and he said, "I worry that the American people have lost the will to absorb pain."
Wow.
Um, Meaning, we go to war, for example, and we want no casualty, right?
Right.
Like that. Like if one soldier dies, it hits the front page news, and obviously, I don't mean to minimize what the impact of that casualty is. I just mean like that is pain that happens with war. Well,
Right.
same thing here, right? Like there is pain that comes with, hey, economy has downturned. Like there's a natural culling that happens with that, and we've lost the will for that.
Hmm. No, I think that's beautifully said, and it's sad, and it's really it comes down to like masking reality, right? And kind of
Yeah,
what we're seeing every day within the corporate media, and how, like I said earlier, it's so laughable. I have Bloomberg on in the background always just to kind
yeah,
of hear what they're saying. I have a really good way of reading through the bullshit, so I kind of like play. What are they not saying? What are they saying today?
yeah,
And this whole narrative of, are we in a recession, are we not, it's just like, come on, guys. Like,
yeah,
the hurt is starting, and
yeah,
if we face the fire to get out of what we've got ourselves to, it's going to be tough, like you said, and there's going to be hurt, and
yeah,
we got to manage those expectations with the reality. So,
yeah,
Peter,
yeah.
this was a great discussion, man. I really enjoyed your insights today. The Canada conversation was great. I'd love to have you back on in the future, man.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I absolutely let me know.
Yeah, well, I want to give you the floor before we go. Where can people find y'all's website, social media?
Yeah, thank you. Greencheckverified.com, of course. Easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn. Peter Sue on LinkedIn. I don't
I'll
actually
inc-
know. How do you say when you're LinkedIn?
It's not even at. I think it's just Peterson would be your name. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll include all those links in the description box so that people can find you very easily. But
cool.
appreciate it again, man. Thank you all for
Yeah,
listening.
thank you so much.
Bye.